Alright, so in this brief video, we're going to start our discussion on race, racism, and policing. We're actually going to discuss the criminal justice system and policing as a whole institution in more detail. So here we're going to look at just a couple intersections of race and policing, in part because this is also going to be the subject of our class time discussion. So, according to one report in 2003, we see that African Americans make up about 12% of the population, and that's still pretty much the case today. However, according to FBI statistics, African Americans are perpetrators of 37% of violent crime arrests and 29% of property crime arrests. At the same time, we see about 25% of subjects of police violence are people of color, or particularly black people. As I record this lecture, there is yet another incident of someone being shot in the back by police. Each of these shows us something in particular. What they're showing us is disproportionality. What that means is that both the apparent crime rates and the incidence of police violence are disproportionately high compared to the amount of the population. This is kind of important because, particularly when we talk about police brutality and violence, some people say more white people are subject to police violence. That's technically true in terms of raw numbers, because there are more white people. But that doesn't mean that they are disproportionately high. In fact, white folks make up about 60% of the population and are less than 50% of the subjects of police violence incidents. So it's important to keep that idea of proportionality in mind. So how do we explain this? Well, in part, we need to look a little bit closely here. What are these numbers really showing us? We need to look at the particular wording here, arrests. We're looking at arrest rates. We're not actually looking at incidents of crime. And that's important because arrests don't necessarily equal crime. We need to think about where the police are when we think about arrest rates. So, in part because there are more police in black communities and because police watch black individuals more closely than they do white folks, we see higher arrest rates. And indeed, at every step of policing, we tend to see disproportionality in terms of being stopped. When stopped, more people of color are arrested, and once arrested, more are charged. Right? So there is definite disproportionality, but there still is actually higher crime in black communities. And one of the things we want to have in our discussion is to think about, why are there higher rates of crime? What are some of the structural things we've already talked about in earlier videos that might lead to that? So when we look at things like arrest rates, we see this clear disproportionality. On the right, you see marijuana use, which is actually higher amongst white folks. And on the left, you see the arrest rates from 2001 to 2010 for marijuana. And this is just one example of what this disproportionality looks like. It's quite stark, as you can see. A fraction of white people are arrested for this, but many, many black folks and currently are in prison for it. We'll get to the criminal justice system more broadly later, but part of what this is showing us is this kind of disproportionality, and this is part of the reason we study it. Now, when we want to think practically and solution-wise, we might start to think about, is there something we can do to address this kind of disparity? Besides something as simple as maybe legalizing marijuana, is there something we could do to reduce the amount of arrest rates? Right. Another key issue we want to think about in this disparity is the issue of criminalization. While many communities can be criminalized, What this term means is that in our society, blackness is often equated with criminality and suspicion. What we want to think about sociologically is, how does this happen? Where does this happen? In reality, there's a long history of this um, throughout our country, but we can really look around to all kind of media and all kind of what we call controlling images. So for example, um, after Mike Brown was shot, many people noted that the photo of him was cropped to make him look more gangster-esque. We'll put it that way. This was when a lot of people were talking about the use of the word thugs in the media. So when you watch your evening news, for example, or when you pick up your paper, if any of you do that, which you may not, or you get your tweet about it, I suppose, pay attention. What images are they using? How do they describe individuals? How does this criminalization happen? Right? Pay attention to the narrative. Often, very quickly after someone is shot, they ask questions of, well, were they high or drunk or committing a crime of some kind? And again, as though this somehow justifies the violence that's committed and the disproportionality. This goes back a long way. D.W. Griffith's famous film, Birth of a Nation, had featured actors in blackface and very much lampooned them as kind of either buffoonish, which is one of the key issues with blackface, or as dangerous, threatening criminals. And so this has a long history. This movie was attributed to reviving the Ku Klux Klan in this country. So we want to think, and what I want you to think about for discussion is, where do we see this kind of criminalization happening around us? And again, is there a way of intervening in this?